In the summer of 1816, something strange happened across Europe and North America. Crops failed in July. Snow fell in June. Rivers froze in places that had never seen ice that time of year. People at the time had no idea why, but they gave that year a haunting nickname, the year without a summer. The cause wasn't anything happening in the sky above them. It happened a year earlier on the other side of the planet, in a place almost nobody in Europe had ever heard of, and it remains, to this day, the deadliest volcanic eruption in all of recorded human history. The place was Mount Tambora, a volcano on the remote island of Sumbawa in what is now Indonesia. Before April 1815, Tambora stood roughly 4,000 meters tall, one of the highest peaks in the entire Indonesian archipelago, towering peacefully over the surrounding villages and rice fields for centuries. Local communities lived around its base for generations, farming, fishing, and trading along the coast. The mountain had occasionally rumbled before, but nothing in living memory had ever suggested what was coming. There were no seismographs, no warning systems, no way for anyone to know just how much pressure had been building deep underground. In the days leading up to the disaster, the mountain began behaving strangely. Loud, rumbling sounds were reported as far away as other islands, hundreds of kilometers across open water, and were initially mistaken by some for distant cannon fire or naval battles happening somewhere out at sea. Indigenous communities on Sumbawa had lived around Tambora for generations, speaking their own distinct language and maintaining unique cultural traditions. The eruption wiped out an entire local kingdom and its people so completely that archaeologists only rediscovered evidence of their civilization buried beneath volcanic ash nearly 200 years later. Then, on the evening of April 10, 1815, Mount Tambora exploded with a force almost impossible to fully comprehend. The eruption is now estimated at a 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a scale that only goes up to 8. It remains the single largest volcanic eruption ever directly observed and documented by human beings. The explosion was so powerful that it was heard over 2,000 kilometers away, on islands where people had no idea a volcano even existed nearby. Many of them assumed they were hearing the sound of warships firing in battle and sent soldiers out to investigate a conflict that simply did not exist. In a matter of hours, the top of the mountain itself was gone. Roughly 1.5 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and molten material were violently ejected into the sky, and the summit collapsed inward, leaving behind a massive caldera 6 kilometers wide where a towering peak had stood just days before. Columns of ash shot more than 40 kilometers straight up into the atmosphere, punching through the troposphere entirely and reaching deep into the stratosphere itself, where the finest particles would remain suspended for years, slowly drifting and spreading around the entire planet on global wind currents. To put the scale of this eruption in perspective, it released roughly 100 times more volcanic material than the famous 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in the United States. Entire villages on the slopes of Tambora were buried within minutes, their existence essentially erased from the historical record forever. The immediate human toll was staggering. Roaring pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and ash moving faster than 100 kilometers per hour, swept down the mountainside and incinerated everything in their path. Historians estimate that around 10,000 people died directly in the eruption itself, within hours or even minutes. But the deaths didn't stop there. The eruption triggered massive tsunamis that struck nearby islands, sweeping away coastal villages and fishing boats with little warning. Floating rafts of pumice, a lightweight volcanic rock, were later found drifting on the ocean for weeks, some still carrying the bodies of victims who never made it to shore. In the months that followed, the true scale of the disaster became clear. Crops across the entire region were destroyed by thick layers of falling ash. Drinking water sources were contaminated for miles around. Famine and disease spread rapidly across Sumbawa and neighboring islands, ultimately killing an estimated 60,000 more people in the surrounding region alone, far more than the eruption itself. But Tambora's true global reach came from something invisible to the naked eye: sulfur dioxide gas, injected directly into the stratosphere along with the ash. Once there, these particles combined with water vapor to form a fine, reflective aerosol haze that began spreading silently around the entire planet within weeks. This high-altitude veil acted like a thin, planet-wide sunshade, reflecting a portion of incoming sunlight back into space before it ever reached the surface. Global average temperatures dropped by an estimated 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius, which sounds small but proved catastrophic for agriculture in many regions. Sunsets around the world turned an unusually vivid blood-red color for months afterward, a phenomenon noted by artists and writers as far away as London, who had no idea they were witnessing the atmospheric aftermath of a volcano on the opposite side of the globe. Modern volcanologists have studied Tambora extensively using ice core samples taken from Greenland and Antarctica, where sulfate deposits from the eruption are still clearly visible today, more than 2 centuries later, frozen in layers of ancient ice like a permanent geological signature of that single catastrophic event. The following year, 1816, became known across the Northern Hemisphere as the year without a summer. In New England, frost was recorded in every single month of the year, including July and August. Snow fell in June across parts of New York and New England, destroying crops that farmers depended on for survival. In Europe, the situation was just as dire. Continuous rain and unusually cold temperatures ruined harvests across England, France, and Germany. Wheat and grain prices soared dramatically as supplies collapsed. What followed has since been called the worst famine of the entire 19th century in the Western world. Tens of thousands of people died from starvation and related diseases across Europe. Desperate families abandoned failing farms entirely and migrated westward in search of better land and better luck, contributing significantly to a wave of emigration toward the United States that reshaped entire communities for generations to come. In Ireland specifically, the failed harvest of 1816 led directly to a typhus epidemic that killed roughly 65,000 people. Switzerland declared a national famine emergency. Livestock died by the thousands across the continent from lack of feed, deepening an already desperate agricultural crisis even further. Some historians have even connected the disastrous harvests of 1816 to broader political and economic instability across Europe in the years that followed, arguing that widespread hunger and economic desperation helped set the stage for social unrest that would echo throughout the rest of the 19th century. Strangely, this global disaster also produced an unexpected cultural legacy. In the summer of 1816, a young writer named Mary Shelley was staying near Lake Geneva in Switzerland with friends, trapped indoors for days by the relentless cold and constant rain that defined that entire ruined summer season. To pass the time, the group challenged each other to write ghost stories. Out of that gloomy, volcano-darkened summer came the novel Frankenstein, one of the most influential works of Gothic literature ever written. Directly inspired by weather that nobody in the room understood was caused by a volcano they had never heard of. The unusually vivid, fiery sunsets caused by volcanic particles in the atmosphere also appear in the work of painters from this exact period, their skies glowing with colors that simply hadn't existed in art before Tambora, and wouldn't again until other major eruptions occurred decades later. In total, historians estimate that the eruption of Mount Tambora and its aftermath killed somewhere between 60,000 and 120,000 people worldwide, making it, by a wide margin, the deadliest volcanic eruption in all of recorded human history. Today, Tambora still exists, though it looks nothing like it once did. Its summit was replaced entirely by an enormous caldera, now a quiet, strangely peaceful crater that occasionally draws hikers and volcanologists curious to see, up close, the scar left behind by the most powerful eruption humanity has ever witnessed. It stands as a stark reminder that a single geological event, on one remote island most people had never heard of, could quietly reshape global weather, spark famine across continents, and even inspire one of literature's most enduring monsters. If you found this fascinating, subscribe, because next week we're exploring something equally astonishing.